Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you today. I figured it'd only take you a moment to realize I'm not 6'8", and I don't wear glasses, so I'm not Clay. But I have worked with him for a number of years, and when I got the call to come and speak with you, I thought, wow, this is cool. I can talk about the innovator's DNA with a DNA sequencing company. So I'm sure at some point you'll look for an opportunity where you could actually find the creativity gene, and then you could help companies screen and figure out which people to hire because they're the divergent thinkers, all right? So there are a myriad of new opportunities here. I want to start, and I want to use Dilbert's company to help illustrate a key idea about innovation. So here the boss pulls his team together, and he says, a good manager hires people who are smarter than he is. Now, how many of you have heard something like this before? And how many of you think it's a pretty good idea? Sounds like a good idea, right? If your boss told you, a good manager hires people who are smarter than he is, you'd probably think, boy, maybe I'm smarter than he is. So, here we have a direct report who hears this and asks a question. So your boss is dumber than you? And your boss's boss is dumber yet? Dilbert leaps to the theory. According to you, our CEO is the dumbest person in the company. Unless you are all bad managers. Because we know a good manager hires people who are smarter than he is or she is. Truly, we are doomed either way, says this direct report. And the boss, ready to nip it in the bud, says, this concludes the motivational part of our meeting. And unmotivated, the direct report says, I'd give you a high five, but I don't like to move. All right. The innovation challenge is challenging the status quo, challenging what someone says that others think is true. You have to change something if you're going to be an innovator. Now, there are actually 3 different types of innovation, and I want to give you this sort of framework to think about sort of the kind of innovations that you might create in your organization. One is called growth innovations, and we think of these as more disruptive innovations. A second type is a sustaining innovation, and a third type is an efficiency innovation. So let me talk first about growth innovations. So a growth innovation is an idea, a product, or a service that transforms an offering from one that's complicated, expensive, and inconvenient to one that is simple, affordable, and convenient. And this then leads to an explosion in usage. If you could create the ability to sequence DNA and give somebody a report for $10, you will open this up to the world, right? That's the kind of idea around a growth innovation. Let me give you an example. Chodacool is a product that was developed with a team, Clayton Christensen, a team working from Innosight, innovation consulting firm he co-founded, and they were working with Godrej, a company that makes appliances in India. 80% of Indian households have no refrigerator. Why? Because they're too expensive, they're large, it requires electricity, which many of them don't have, or at least it comes off and on during the day, and it's very difficult to service. The question is, how do you create a product that will open the door for every Indian household to have a refrigerator? So the team went about figuring out what kind of a refrigerator would you create that you could sell for less than $50? And this is what they came up with, what they call Chodacool. It's affordable. It is less than $50. It's small. They can move it around. You can repurpose it. It requires no electricity. It has a battery that is in the lid. In fact, all of the electronic components are in the lid of this product, and it uses solid-state thermoelectric concepts and technology to deliver it. It has no compressor, and all it needs is to keep food cool for about 2 to 3 days. And this product won an Edison Award, and I think actually one of the coolest things that they came up with was not the product innovation itself, it was the distribution innovation. They used the post office in India as the delivery method because every household has a postman. And this person is trusted. Now, if something goes wrong with your Chodacool, you give the lid to the postman, he can take it back, and you can get it serviced. That easy. that opens up a refrigerator to millions and millions and millions of folks that wouldn't have had it before. That's a growth innovation because it allows a lot more people to buy and use a product. Now, sustaining innovation is basically a better product offering that generates even better profits from your current customers. Typically, it tends to be sort of new features that you're offering to the customer. This is important for your success. But sustaining innovations don't fundamentally create growth because they tend to be replacements of a prior product. So if you think about in TVs, Sony, Samsung, they created plasma TVs. Then they came up with LED TVs. The more recent innovation is a 3D TV. So what happens is someone replaces the prior generation with the next generation product. It has new features, and this is important, but it doesn't fundamentally create new growth. So you just need to be aware. If you want to grow as a company, you need to have growth innovations. Sustaining innovations will keep your base and sort of slightly increase your base. But if you want true growth innovations, like Apple, they couldn't really get growth just building the computer business. They needed a music business, and then they needed a phone business that actually created new growth for the company. And the final type of innovation is an efficiency innovation. And I think of these are process or business model innovations that typically create an efficient new business model. Okay, so this is where allowing companies to create, deliver, sell, service something more efficiently. So think about the way book buying has changed, right? You go from Barnes & Noble to Amazon. And basically, it's not that we get a different book or that there's a lot of innovation there in that sense. What they've done is that they have made it simpler, more convenient in that sense, but it's a much more efficient way to get a book to you. Dell's direct model was all about an efficiency innovation. Every time you come up with a new process idea for your company, we can do this, we can allow us to do something quicker, faster, more efficiently. You are coming up with an efficiency innovation. And that's valuable because that means your organization needs fewer resources in order to get the same amount of work done. Okay, so all three types are important. So companies need all three types. The question you need to ask yourself is, what type of innovations am I producing? And do I know how to innovate? So first takeaway from my talk today is your job is to innovate for your company. You are the leaders of this company. Your job is to come up with growth innovations, sustaining innovations, and efficiency innovations if you're going to continue to be as successful in the future as you have been in the past. Now, I want to talk about what do I do to be a more creative problem solver? And I want to start here with a statement. Now, I'm a professor at Wharton and BYU, and so I like to give tests to my students. And one that I often give the first day of class is studies by psychologists show that creativity is largely a genetic endowment where nature trumps nurture in importance. Now, as a DNA sequencing company, this could be interesting to you, okay? Now, the answer that the typical North American audience gives is it's genetic. We've learned about being right-brained, which means you are here in the flowers and the trees and you're having a good time being a divergent thinker, or you're left-brained, which means you're in those gray cubicles, head down, logical linear thinker, getting things done, right? And we've sort of heard that. The majority of people think, I'm just genetically challenged. It's genetic, and it's mom and dad's fault. It's not mine, it's mom and dad's fault. So there's actually some interesting studies that have been done by some psychologists to test this. And here's what they did. They took identical twins. The best studies are done with samples where they were separated at birth and raised in different environments. And then between the ages of 15 to 25, they gave them a set of creativity tests and a set of general intelligence tests, IQ tests. And here's what they found. The results showed that 80% of their performance on IQ tests, this is around how well you can memorize facts, how well you can sort of solve these little puzzles and problems that we give you. If you do well on our standardized tests in the United States, then you tend to be pretty good in terms of general intelligence. Most of that's genetic. So if you don't do it well on standardized tests, you call mom and dad and tell them it's your fault, right? But what we found is that only a third of their sort of performance on creativity tests is genetically based. In other words, people learn something along the way. And actually, I've thought about this. I spent 2 years living in Korea, spent a lot of time in Asia. Hal Gregerson, my colleague, he's a professor at Abu Dhabi, or at INSEAD, spends part of his year at the Abu Dhabi campus. We talked about how Asian culture, and I've spent a lot of time in Korea, and how Arabic culture is different from what we see here. One of the fundamental things that you learn if you work for a Korean organization is you don't question the boss. If the boss says we're going to do something, you don't say, should we really be doing this? That is not a culturally appropriate thing to do. And since questioning is the key catalyst and starting point for innovation, that tends to stifle innovation. Your environment matters. Your country environment, the country culture you grow up in, your family culture, your educational system, and your corporate culture all influences your ability to ask questions and to be innovative. So our environment actually makes a difference, and what we learn along the way makes a difference. So it's not just genetic. In fact, it's only about a third nature and about 2/3 nurture. The good news for all of us is that means you have more creative capacity than you think. You just have to know, what do innovators, creative people do to come up with ideas? And that's what I want to talk about. And that was the primary focus of the Innovators DNA Project. We looked at a set of disruptive innovators, people who came up with growth and efficiency innovations, those we think of as disruptive innovations. And we asked, well, how does a Jeff Bezos innovate? If it's not just genetics, what techniques does he use? And a whole class of disruptive innovators, how do they get new ideas? And if I can learn from the masters, then maybe I can learn some techniques that I can use to get new ideas. So the starting point for creative ideas is there is a cognitive skill that somehow allows you to connect the unconnected and put it together in new ways. We call this associating or associational thinking. It is the ability to connect things that have not been connected before. Some people call it creative thinking, right brain thinking, lateral thinking, but it's this ability to connect things that haven't been put together before. Albert Einstein once said, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them, right? He went on to say, creative thought involves combinatorial play. It's just combining things in new ways. Combining ideas in new ways is the essential feature in productive thought. So if you want to be more creative, you've got to bombard your mind with sort of new, novel information, ideas, and then try and connect those in new and different ways. So think about the ability to create a new, innovative feature for a product. The original iPod, one of the most innovative features was the flywheel design. What most people don't know is, where did that idea come from? A lock. Now, it's like, what does a lock have to do with a portable music player? And yet someone saw the lock and thought, you know what? This could be a cool way to scroll through this device where we're going to try and get through hundreds of songs. In fact, have you noticed on an iPod you can even hear the little clicking as you go around? They even put, sort of that in. And in fact, they not only they used that for the flywheel design, but they liked the brushed metallic look of a lock, and they actually brought that same look and design to the early iPod. So it's about seeing connections. And what we've done is we've forced you to put things together that haven't been put together before, and it is starting to be the catalyst for associational thinking in your brain. I went out and looked actually at a couple of products that might have been the result of this type of exercise. I found one, this in-sink dishwasher, which actually the beautiful thing for me is I hate to put dishes away. So what you do is you just close that lid, you put their dishes in, it does a load in like 5 minutes, and then you never have to put the dishes away. And I also saw this Edgestar Countertop dishwasher, which, it looked like a microwave to me. I thought it was strange, but now you think about dorm rooms and places all around the world that have a lot less space, this kind of dishwasher could be really useful. All right, so that's how associational thinking works. You can force it by literally going through this sort of activity of connecting different things together and forcing your brain to do it, or you can feed it. And what we learned is that associational thinking is a cognitive skill that produces creative ideas. Now the question is, if it's not just genetics, and genetics is part of it, but if it's not just genetics, then what is it that drives associational thinking? And what we learned from our study is that there were four discovery behaviors that tend to drive more and new associations. And those were questioning. The more you question, the more you are going to generate more associations. The more you observe, the more you're going to generate more associations. The more you experiment, the more associations you'll generate, and the more you network with people who have different backgrounds. The more you network for ideas, the more you will generate new associations. So, if I could be head of sort of marketing for Apple for a day, you've all heard think different many times, but it's not enough to just say think different. In fact, what I'm saying is you have to act different if you want to think different. In fact, I'd flip it and I'd say act different, think different. If you want to think different, you've got to act different, and that means you've got to change your behaviors. So, let's start with the first of the four behaviors, and we'll talk about questioning for a moment. So here we have Dilbert and his buddy meeting with the boss, and his friend says, and since our bonuses depend on things we can't control, can mine be based on the performance of some other company? Now that's thinking outside the company, right? Yeah, you ask one question, suddenly you're not a team player. Okay, so, in fact, this is at least asking a question that challenges the status quo. So what is questioning? We're talking about questioning. It's really being questions that challenge the status quo and the way things are. Those tend to be the most important kinds of questions for creative and innovative thought. And you're trying to gain an understanding of what a problem is and what a problem is not. So, what do we learn from some of the best innovators? One thing we learned that was really interesting is that good questions actually often impose constraints on our thinking. And that forces us to try and think around the constraint to come up with a more creative and innovative solution. Let me give you an example. One innovator, she was looking for some new growth ideas for her organization or team, asked this question: what if we were legally prohibited from selling any of our current products to our current set of customers? How would we make money next year? Okay? Now I got to think around the constraint. What if we could only interact with our customers online? How would that change the way we do business? What if we only had 25% of our budget? How would we do business next year, right? Those are the kinds of constraints. If you can impose those and get people to really engage to try and think about how to think around them, you might get some creative ideas. Sometimes they also eliminate constraints. So, what if money were no object? What kind of product would we create? This is something that Steve Jobs was known to ask at Apple, to try and get people to sort of take off the, let's not think about money for a moment, what would the perfect product be like if we could create it? Now think about it. We've come a long way, if you're like me, since those days when you were jogging with the Discman. You remember that? Well, that was quite an experience. Really enjoyable portable music, okay? And the iPod is clearly a leapfrog in technology. You know, I can take my entire library, I can put it in my pocket, easy to take, easy, portable. It's not perfect, at least not for me yet, because those little earbuds, you know, they pop out, they don't deliver the sound quite the way it should. So now think about, what would the perfect product actually be? What if you could think of the song you wanted to listen to, click play in your mind, and listen to it in stereo sound? That would be really portable music, right? So they're not there yet, but if you were trying to come up with technology to approach that, you might be able to come up with something that would really be innovative and wow customers. Then you're going to go through the process of doing some observations, you're going to network with some people, and you're going to run some experiments to answer those questions, and that will help lead you to a more creative solution to your problem. And what happens when you put yourself in new environments is that you become more sensitized that they do something different here. And this is likely to bring in new, fresh knowledge where you'll say, why do they do it that way here? What if we did it, differently where I'm sort of from, in my environment? So what is observing? It's really noticing the world around you. And why? Because you're trying to gain insights into new ways of doing things. But here's the critical idea around observing. You're looking for surprises. You're looking for anomalies. Breakthroughs happen when you find something that you didn't expect. It's like, oh, I didn't expect that. Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, he told us, in our study. He said, the only way I know how to teach people to be more innovative is to teach them how to observe and ask just one question that often generates surprising responses. What's different than you expected? So they send their marketing people to follow customers home. They open up their software. They put in their TurboTax or the Quicken or whatever, and they watch them use it. And then the user doesn't use it the way they expected. And they're like, well, wait, that's surprising. Why did they do it that way? We weren't expecting that when we designed it. And then that helps them to uncover a new way to help someone navigate, because they watch how it gets used and they look for surprises. So when you're doing observing, you want to look for surprises. The next behavior I want to talk about is experimenting. This is one of the early experiments in transportation. And poor Thor bore the brunt of this experiment that, this really wasn't the best way to get you down the hill. But sometimes you've got an idea and you just got to go test it and see if it will work. And this is the classic way that we think about experimenting, is we're going to run a pilot, we're going to create a prototype, we're going to test it and see if it works. But we found that innovators actually tend to experiment in 3 different ways. One is testing ideas, but the other 2 were just seeking new experiences and learning new skills. And the third was taking things apart, products, processes, ideas, and putting them back together to see what you learn. So I want to talk about these latter 2, seeking new experience and taking things apart. So I think we know the sort of classic way of testing ideas. Let me introduce you to Nate Alder, one of the innovators we studied as part of our project. Nate was a snowboard instructor. He decided he wanted to pick up a new skill. He decided he wanted to learn to scuba dive. So he started to go on different excursions, scuba diving, learning how to do it in different parts of the world. And as he did some deeper dives in some colder waters, he learned that they used in these wetsuits this argon gas to keep you warm. And he was like, oh, that's interesting. I had no idea. And he thought, I wonder if there's some way I could bring argon gas to my clothing so that I don't freeze my butt off when I'm out there, teaching, snowboarding on those cold, wintry days. So then he basically takes apart the wetsuit and how the argon gas works. He understands it inside and out, and then he designs a product. And there are a whole line of products now called Climate, K-L-Y-M-I-T. And you see the little ribbing that's in the jackets, and they have blankets and things like that as well. You actually use an argon gas canister that it fills it up, and for like 8 hours, that will help keep you warmer than anything else. It's lightweight, and it is an innovative new product line. And it all came about simply because he was learning a new skill. Many of you have heard the story about Steve Jobs learning calligraphy. He learns calligraphy. He says, that was not going to have any practical implication for my life. And then he said, we were designing the Macintosh computer, and he said, it all came back to me. And we brought beautiful typography to the Mac. And he said, if we hadn't brought those proportionally shaped fonts and all of that beautiful typography, maybe no computer would have it today. It all started because he just learned a different skill. He learned calligraphy. Michael Dell starts Dell Computer because he takes apart his computer and puts it back together, and he starts doing this, and he starts souping up computers. He said the way most teenagers would soup up cars. He'd add a little boost here, a little boost there. He said, I realized after about 2 years, I'd bought every component. And he said, you could buy an IBM PC at that time in the retail store for $2,500. And he said, I realized I could buy all the parts for $600 to $700, which meant if I could just assemble it for another couple hundred, I had huge margins. And that was what led to the Dell Direct model. Typical networking is all about networking for resources, okay? Good executives network for resources, but that's not the kind of networking I'm talking about. I'm talking about networking for ideas, okay? So, a few important points here. You're trying to actively seek diverse ideas through your networking because you're trying to gain a new perspective, okay? That's really important. Marc Benioff is one of the innovators that we studied. He told us, he said, I like to hang out with young entrepreneurs, like Drew Houston, the 28-year-old co-founder of Dropbox. He grew up on the internet. I didn't. So he can see things in ways that I don't. That perspective is really important. I can't sit in my headquarters and pretend I'm in touch. Benioff is the only person over age 40 that I know of who came up with the idea for a social networking product. And that is, it was his idea that came up with Chatter, which is sort of, combination of sort of Facebook and Twitter for businesses. I have to believe the fact that Benioff does every couple of weeks, tries to do some sort of an event where he sits down, he has lunch or dinner with young entrepreneurs to see what they're thinking, what they're working on, what they're doing, and he tries to do this with folks in other groups as well, in other populations. This helps spur new ideas for him. Many of you have seen this book, Don't Never Eat Alone, and I think that's a great idea. Don't eat alone. I don't know that the content of the book is necessarily that terrific, but the general idea is good. I just want to add a wrinkle to it. Don't eat with someone who thinks like you, okay? So think about not like me, not like me. This is hard. You want to be with people who are like you, right? It's comfortable, it's easy. Hey, the marketing folks, we're going out together to lunch, right? You got to go talk to somebody in engineering? Those HR people? Come on. I don't necessarily want to get those ideas. So, what's not like me? Not like me. Profession or education. People with different profession or education. People who are in a different organizational function. People who are in a different organization altogether. A different industry. A different gender. A different age. Different nationality. Different ethnic group. Political group. Religious group. All of those kinds of differences will mean that others will have a perspective that's more likely to be different from yours. And that means you're much more likely to come up with a new idea. A study by Ron Burt, professor at University of Chicago, found that managers in organizations that get the highest promotions and are viewed as coming up with more creative and innovative ideas, they had the broadest networks throughout the company and outside of the company. And what they were doing is they were going to others for ideas and pulling them in. You can look brilliant if you just arbitrage someone else's idea, right? You just go find someone's idea and you say, well, wait, we haven't applied it here in our organization. And if you haven't seen it, it's new to you. It's like those reruns, right? If you haven't seen it, it's new to you. You pull in an idea from somebody else. So you want to try and network with people who can bring a different perspective to you. So key takeaway number 3 from my talk is 4 behaviors: questioning, observing, experimenting, and networking will turbocharge your creative thinking. At the end of the day, remember, creativity is not just a genetic endowment. The implication is you're going to have to act different if you want to think different. And a place you might start, for some people, for many people, I think actually, one place you might start to sort of practice these skills a bit more is start at home. Start in your family. So I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family where my father actually was an experimenter at times. He would try different things. He had a PhD in sociology, and so we were his guinea pigs, right? He had 5 kids, and we were his guinea pigs. So one time, he decided that his 5 children, 4 boys and a daughter, we weren't very good at looking at what needed to be done around the house and helping out. Now, I'm sure none of you have problems with your kids in that, but so he decided to do a little experiment. He took a perfectly ironed white shirt, and he laid it down in the central walkway of our home. And his kids had to walk over that space probably 4, 5, 6 times a day. And he watched for 2 days while his kids carefully stepped over that white shirt. Nobody picks it up. So he's like, okay, maybe they didn't see it. He picks up the white shirt, he grabs a dining room chair, he pulls it over, he tips it over. And he watches for the next day while we climb over the dining room chair to go about our business. And then he's had enough. He calls us together and he says, okay, kids, anybody see the white shirt? Yeah, we saw the white shirt. Did you think to pick it up? Hey, not my responsibility. Wasn't my shirt. I didn't put it there. Okay, what about the dining room chair? Did you see it? Of course we saw it. It's supposed to be in the dining room. Why didn't you take it back? So once again, not my responsibility. Now, I remember this because this is one of the few conversations where he starts to talk about there isn't going to be any inheritance for you kids unless you're going to start thinking about being careful to help us take care of it, right? This was a little experiment. Another time, and in hindsight, now I understand more about behind this experiment, he decided he was going to try something that we might call kid swap. He took my 16-year-old brother, Mike, and he traded him for Herb McLean, the neighbor kid about the same age, for a week. That's a good idea, isn't it? Take that teenager and get him somewhere else. I remember after a week, so we had Herb live with us, and they had to live by their rules. And I remember Mike comes back. My dad orchestrates the two families get together, and we hear these two teenage boys talk about what it's like to live in a different family and what they liked and what they didn't like. And Mike learns that there were some things that we did that he thought were really bad that were worse at the McLeans. You know, it wasn't quite as bad as he thought, but he also found some things that were better. In fact, he came back and he said, you know, the McLeans do this. It was a family activity that they did on Monday nights. And he said, could we start doing this in our family? Now, how many of you have a teenage son who actually is championing a family activity? Okay? It just doesn't happen. So this is sort of opening up. So he's doing some experiments. I have tried with my children. So my oldest son, Aaron, as I learned about this, I said, I'm going to try and teach my kids to be better questioners. And so I asked this question to Aaron. He comes home, he's like 9th, 10th grade. And I said, what do we usually ask people when they come home from school? How's your day? And you get nothing. So I said, okay, Aaron, tell me, what was the best question that you asked today or that you heard today at school? And he's like, oh, Dad, what are you trying to pull, right? No, really, I'm just interested. What was the best question? Was there a question that came in your mind? And then I started to learn something about Aaron when I probed and pushed. Man, he hates science. I mean, there were no questions that mattered to him at all. But he had a mechanics class. He thought there were a lot of questions around how machines work and autos work that were really interesting. And so I started to ask these questions and started to tell my kids, I love your questions. Ask me questions. I think it's so cool when you ask questions about the world. I've tried to take my kids with me to visit other places around the world, India, China, Brazil, so they can observe in different environments and to meet different people. Those are the kinds of things you can do to perhaps not only help yourself, but even help your children or grandchildren, extended family, to become more creative thinkers. So if you don't think you can do it yourself, let's at least save the next generation. Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure to be with you today.